Hi, I'm Nava. I'm a clinical nutritionist with a specialty in eating disorders. I was born and raised in Toronto, Canada, and I'm now living in Israel on Moshav Azriel, which is near Tel Mond, Ra'anana, Netanya area. So today's topic is an introduction to intuitive eating, shining a light on your hunger and fullness signals. So let's begin. So I think a lot of us feel in the culture that we live in, a little bit of confusion about what is healthy nutrition. Okay, we are bombarded with information. Information is always being updated. There is lots of diets out there, and we end up jumping from diet to diet, plan to meal plan. We find lots of nutrition gurus. And in the end, we end up very confused. We live in a culture that overall teaches us that we can't trust our bodies, and we're always looking for somebody else to tell us what to eat, when to eat, and how much to eat. So who really knows what's best for us? And where is this secret answer to true health? So in my opinion, and according to the theory of intuitive eating, the answer to true health and happiness and balance and pleasure all lies within you, in your body. Okay, that your body has an internal wisdom that knows exactly what's right for you. And it's sending you signals all the time. And all we have to do is listen. And then once we hear the signals and we're in tune with the signals, then we have to trust them. So today we're going to learn a little bit of an introduction of how we can be in tune with these signals and how we can trust them and how they can be a benefit for us. So some tools that we're going to learn today are tools that I use in my practice. So first of all, we're going to dive deep into understanding the biology of hunger, okay, which is science-based. So understanding how our survival instincts, okay, and how the biology of hunger affects us and how it's affected by diets and diet culture. We're going to go over some tools that I use in my practice as well from CBT, okay, which are tools that help us become more aware of our behavior and also change our behavior, okay, combining our thoughts with our behavior. And lastly, we're going to go over some tools from mindfulness and intuitive eating, also something that I use in my practice a lot, which brings us into our bodies, okay, brings us present with our body, and it helps us become aware of what our body is telling us so that we know exactly what our body needs. Okay, so I split up this lesson into 3 parts. First, we're going to learn about the effects of diets and how it affects our body, the effects of diet culture. Then we're going to learn some tools of how to reconnect to our body, okay, and to eat intuitively. And then last, we're going to talk about how to raise an intuitive eater. Okay, so if you are a parent or an educator or any type of healthcare professional or therapist and you want to teach youth or the people around you how to also be an intuitive eater, then I'm going to give you tools to do that as well. Okay, so let's begin. Okay, so diet culture. Okay, the big number on the screen there, okay, that represents how much diet culture is worth in the United States. Okay, so it is a $1 billion industry in the United States. And basically the way that it works is that companies sell you a diet, doesn't work, so you continue going back to them. And that's why it's such a successful business plan. But let's see how it affects our bodies and how it affects our weight, our biology, our psychology. Okay. So the main thing that happens when we follow a diet is that instead of listening to our body's needs, we listen to what somebody else is telling us to do. We listen to some diet guru or company that sets for us a plan of how much to eat, when to eat, and what to eat. And it might not go according to what we actually want. So maybe I want to eat one thing and it's telling me to eat something else. Or maybe I like to eat in the morning and it's telling me to fast until the afternoon. So what happens is instead of trusting myself and trusting what my body's telling me, I ignore myself and I ignore my body. I ignore my signals because I believe that somebody else has a better answer. Okay, so what happens when somebody tells us not to do something? For example, we read a sign, don't enter. What's our automatic reaction? Obviously, we want to go inside and see what's there. Okay, it creates curiosity and it creates us to actually want to do the exact opposite thing. And it's really similar with food. So if we're on a diet plan and we're told not to eat carbs, okay, let's say we chose a gluten-free diet or some kind of diet that is going to help us with our gluten addiction. Okay, for example, that's a popular diet out there. So how is that going to affect me on a biological level and on a psychological level? How is that going to affect my body if I decide not to eat gluten for a month? Well, most likely during that month, I'll be thinking all day long about how to get to the closest bakery to have a piece of fresh baked bread, right? Okay, and that's on a psychological level, that when we're told not to do something, we want it even more. And also on a biological level, that if our body is missing a certain component, a certain nutritional component, okay, that is essential for us, for example, carbohydrates, okay, and other vitamins and minerals that are in bread, then our body is going to send us signals saying, I want bread. Okay, so it just makes it even harder to then avoid it. Okay, another thing that happens to us when we're on a diet, I like to call this the burglar effect. Okay, so this is a metaphor that I use. So let's say you have a home and one day a burglar breaks into your house, okay, and steals all kinds of stuff. Steals a safe and some money and some jewelry. Okay, after the burglar leaves, you're going to say to yourself, wow, I should be more careful next time. Okay, I have things in this house that I want to protect and I need to protect this space. So I'm going to set up an alarm system and maybe I'm going to install some new locks and maybe a couple of video cameras so that next time the burglar comes in and tries to steal from me and from my essential belongings, it won't be able to. Okay, and that's exactly what the body does. And that's exactly how the body reacts. Okay, so when a diet comes along and says, I'm going to prevent you from eating certain essential nutrients, okay, and this could be on a biological level and it could be on an emotional level. It could be that, foods that you're very connected to emotionally, you are refraining from eating them. So your body is feeling a certain stress, okay, it's lacking something that is essential for it. And we could even call it a certain trauma. Okay, that all of a sudden something that's so used to is gone. And how does it react? It sets up an alarm system. Okay, so it sets up a system that it's going to protect its belongings or its essential items. Okay, so in the body metaphor, it'll be maybe its fat storage. And it's going to then, next time you do a diet, it's going to be even harder to lose weight. Okay, so what happens is if it protects itself and it holds on to its fat or other storages so that it won't be lost again. Okay, it almost remembers the diet as a trauma. Okay, and then that's why we see a trend that looks like this. Okay, so before the diet, you're a certain weight, then while you're on the diet, you lose weight, and after the diet, then you may gain weight, and it'll be even harder to lose weight because your body will then change its metabolism so the weight loss won't occur. Okay, because the body doesn't like weight loss. Okay, it sees it as an attack or a trauma. Okay. So now I want to go over the effects, the psychological effects of a starving brain. Okay, so around World War II, there was a study that was done, okay, that according to ethics today would never pass, it would never be done nowadays. So the study was done, they took a group of men who normally ate around 3,500 calories, okay, which was appropriate for their age and energy expenditure. And they cut it in half and gave them about, on an average, 1,500 calories, okay, which is similar to a typical diet that would be suggested to an adult. And so for about half a year, this group of men ate 1,500 calories, and they were tracked on a biological level, psychological level, and they checked how the lower calorie intake affected. Okay, so some of the results that were seen immediately were, first of all, anxiety, depression, and also that the men became very antisocial. So on a psychological level, it affected them. And what's more interesting is that they noticed that these men became food obsessed. Okay, so for example, they were instances of binge eating. There were instances of theft. Okay, so the men would leave the campus and steal food, and it could have been from, there was an ice cream store, there was a grocery store, there was a little makole that also, and there was even an instance of men going through the garbage to get food. Okay, so we see that their minds now are becoming obsessed with looking for food. Okay, they were seen playing with food. Okay, spending more time at mealtime playing with the food, mushing the food. Some men ate for a much longer period of times and stretched out their meals. There was a big anxiety of throwing out food. So men wouldn't have any food go to waste. And then later on, after the experiment, there was in most of the men on an average, most of the men had a weight gain. Okay, so they gained weight more. They then gained weight and were at a weight that was higher than the weight that they were at before. Okay, so here we also see that trend of after diet, there's a weight gain as a response. Okay, there's a body responding to a trauma and wanting to protect its fat storage. Okay, and along with the weight gain, there was a big anxiety. Okay, there was a big fear of weight gain, okay, and wanting to continue the diet. And then 73 years later, okay, they then followed up, okay, on this population of men to see how this diet affected them 73 years ago. What they noticed was that a very large percentage of the men continued to be food obsessed, okay, and food continued to be an essential part of their lives and careers and hobbies. Okay, so many of the men wrote cookbooks, were chefs, were nutritionists, were food journalists. And so what we see is, I think, one of our biggest takes from this experiment, okay, is that we see that when our brain is starved, when our body is starved, it causes us to think more about food. It causes us to, as we saw in the study, it causes us to be anxious about food, to be obsessed with food, and to be looking for food. And I think that this is sort of a microcosm of our culture. Okay, that when we have this this diet culture, what it can cause is it can cause us to think more about food instead of it being a neutral topic, it becomes a very charged topic. And so for us, when we go on a diet, and we limit ourselves from food, it causes us to think more about food. And that is what can cause a weight gain. Okay, so that's what causes the trend of an increase in weight after dieting. And it brings us to the question, what came first? Okay, did the obesity in the United States cause diet culture, or did diet culture cause obesity? Because as we see from the study, that when we diet, we think more about food. And when we think more about food, we eat more food. And it leads us to the next question is it even possible to change your body shape? So even if I am at a larger body shape, is it even possible for me to change my body shape? And so more and more we're understanding that the likelihood of me being able to change my body shape and actually lose weight for a long and sustain it for long term is almost impossible. We're seeing that the rate of success long term from diets are about 3%. Okay, so more and more we're starting to understand that we are relating to weight and body shape as if it was any other type of physical character trait. Okay, so the word fat or thin, overweight or underweight should be equivalent to saying if somebody has blonde hair, blue eyes, if they're tall, if they're short, if they have red hair, if they have curly hair, if they have straight hair. It's something that's very hard to change. It's something that is genetic, that I'm born with, it's my size and my shape. Okay, so yes, I have blonde hair. I could dye it. I could dye it if I wanted to, or I have pale skin. Okay, the fact that I have pale skin, yes, it has health implications. It means that I have a higher risk of getting skin cancer. So I have to be careful and I have to wear sunscreen, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I have to now work very hard to change the color of my skin. Because if I do, there might be risks to that. And that's what we're seeing more and more, okay? That people that are overweight, we see that dieting could have a greater risk than weight loss, okay? And we see also that in every population in nature, there's always going to be variety. So if we look in a population of dogs, there will always be small dogs and big dogs and black dogs and white dogs. And in nature, okay, in plants, in fruits and vegetables, there will be all different colors and all different sizes. And the same for us humans. So it's important that we accept the fact that there will always be people that are overweight and there will always be people that are underweight, and we can be healthy at all sizes. Okay. So is it possible to change your body shape? Yes, but the question is, what is the price that we pay? Okay. Is it going to be long-term? What effects is it going to have on my body? And is it really the most healthy approach? Okay. So what intuitive eating says is instead of fighting my body, okay, instead of fighting my body and not listening to my body and listening to an external diet in order to try at all prices to change my body shape, instead of the fight, I can choose to listen. Instead of fighting my body, I'll flow with my body. Okay, and so that's the principle of intuitive eating. So intuitive eating teaches the hunger scale, which means that instead of listening to a diet that tells me how much to eat, I listen to my own body and to my own signals to know when to eat and how much to eat and what to eat. Okay, and so we can map out our hunger and fullness on a scale from 1 to 10. And the goal here is that we try to stay within the hunger and fullness that are not on the extreme. Okay, so we don't want to get to, for example, number 1, where I feel famished and faint and irritable. And I also don't want to get to number 10, which I feel overstuffed and I'm feeling sick. Okay. And so I want to stay sort of in the range of 3 to 7. Okay, so I want to get to hungry and ready to eat, And seven would be, so maybe I would want to stay at 6. Sorry. I would want to be at 6, satisfied, no longer hungry. Because if I get to the extremes, then I already start feeling uncomfortable. Okay. So then the question is always asked, well, if I become an intuitive eater and I eat when my body tells me, and I eat according to what my desires are, and I eat according to how much I want, and I don't listen to an external plan, then I'm just gonna eat chocolate all day. I'm gonna have chocolate for breakfast, I'm gonna have chocolate for dinner, I'm gonna have chocolate for lunch, and I'm gonna have as much as I want. So yes and no. It could be that if you've been deprived from chocolate because you've been dieting for months and months or years and years or decades and decades, then yes, it could be that for a while you'll want to eat chocolate day after day after day. But according to intuitive eating, what'll happen is slowly, okay, your body will send signals that will balance out the foods that you eat. For example, after days and days of eating chocolate, most likely you're not going to want to continue eating chocolate. It won't be tasty anymore. Okay, our bodies like variety. Okay, we don't like to eat the same food day after day after day, the same, pot of rice to reheat it up the whole week. Our bodies like variety. So what will most likely happen is intuitively, our body is going to say after a couple of days of eating chocolate that we're going to want to eat something else. And this is something that'll happen naturally. And so with intuitive eating, intuitively, you end up eating a variety and a balanced nutrition. And so intuitive eating really is about balance, or another word for it is dialectic. Dialectic means that we're holding two opposites together. Okay. So according to intuitive eating, I'm supposed to eat according to what my body tells me and when my body is feeling hungry. So that would be spontaneity. Okay. But that doesn't mean that I don't need to be prepared. Okay. It doesn't mean that I don't need to have food prep. So it doesn't mean that I wake up in the morning with no food in my fridge and I go to work and I have no food in my bag and not a water bottle. And I wait until the moment where all of a sudden I really, really want to have a peanut butter sandwich and I'm stuck at work and I have to now walk around the city to find a peanut butter sandwich. No. Okay. I can prepare my food. Okay. I can prepare my food. So for example, I can have my fridge filled with nutritious food and I can, wake up at 8 in the morning and have my peanut butter sandwich ready to go to work. And maybe when I get to work, I can ask myself, do I want my peanut butter sandwich right now? And if the answer is, I'm actually feeling full right now. I had a really big meal yesterday. So I'm still feeling full. I'm going to wait an hour. That's intuitive eating. Or another example would be, I have my peanut butter sandwich and I'm still feeling hungry. It didn't really fill me up like it usually does. So I think I'm going to go downstairs to the coffee shop and get another one. That's intuitive eating. Okay. So that's holding both being spontaneous and being prepared at the same time. Okay. Another thing is another dialectic that we hold when we're eating intuitively is that on one hand, we like to strive to eat foods that are nourishing. Okay. The more nourishing the food is, then the more filling it'll be for my body. Okay. My body will get what it needs. And then my body will be calm. Okay. And so then the effect that we get from dieting, where I'm always thinking about food, will then slowly diminish. Okay. Because I'm giving my body what it needs. My body is calm. My body is full. And then my body is quiet. Okay. So we work on giving our body nourishing foods, give it what it needs. Okay. But on the other hand, we're also permitted to give it foods that are less nourishing. Okay. And so we have both. We make sure that we have nourishing foods in the fridge and that we bring nourishing foods with us to work in our day to day. But that doesn't mean that I'm not allowed then to have a food that's less nourishing at a holiday event or, snacks in between or a family gathering. It's both. Okay. And then of course, the last one is to be able to accept where I'm at right now and to be ready for change. So now let's go over the hunger scale, okay? And I'll give you some examples of different numbers in the hunger scale. So for example, number two is very hungry, need food fast. Okay, so as I said before, with a hunger scale, we don't want to get to extremes, because when we get to extremes, we react in extremes. Okay, so for example, here's a metaphor. If I'm swimming underwater and I'm holding my breath for a very, very long time, my body isn't getting the oxygen that it needs. What happens when I come up from the water? Is my breathing going to be slow and calm? Or is it going to be fast and intense and uncontrolled, right? So it's similar with food. If I am holding myself back from eating for hours and hours and hours, and I'm very, very hungry, and I'm getting to an extreme hunger where I'm already anxious and uncomfortable, then most likely when I open up the fridge, I'm not going to sit down and have a calm, relaxed meal where I'm aware of how much I'm eating. It could be that I'll open up the fridge and the first thing that I'm going to see is a big cake, and I'm going to eat the whole thing because I'm so hungry and I'm not even aware, and it's uncontrolled. Okay. And that's the same thing with coming up from water, right? I take in a big breath and it's uncontrolled and I'm not aware. And so that's why with intuitive eating, when we're in tune with our hunger and fullness, then we'll make sure to give ourselves food when we need it and not to get to the extremes, because we get to the extremes, that's what can cause overeating, eating out of control, and eating foods that aren't necessarily good for us. Because when our body is hungry, it wants food fast, and it wants food that's available, and it wants high sugar, high carb, high fat foods because it needs energy now. Okay, and the other opposite is, let's say, number 9, too full, have to unbutton my pants. Okay, that's number 9. Everybody, or many of you maybe have seen the Thanksgiving episode of Joey when he puts on Phoebe's pregnancy pants. So that's what it feels like when you have to then unbutton your pants or put on your pregnancy pants. Okay, so what happens when we get to a fullness that we feel absolutely uncomfortable? Okay, so instead of judgment, instead of saying, oh, I ate too much, oh, I hate it when this happens, oh, I should have been like this, I should have done like that, we can replace judgment with curiosity. And we can say, I wonder how that happened. How did it happen that, ask ourselves questions to try to understand what happened in that situation. So, oh, maybe I went to a wedding and I ate too much, and now I'm feeling number 9, my stomach's hurting me. And what I can ask myself is, well, what happened at the wedding that, I got to this place that I overate? Maybe I was, too busy talking to friends and I wasn't concentrated. And so I ate too much, and I only realized later on in the night. And then with that curiosity, you can also, get tools for next time. So the tool would be, I think that I ate a bit too much. I was really concentrated on, seeing this friend of mine who I haven't seen in a long time. Maybe next time when I get to the wedding, the first thing I'll do is go right to the table, take the foods that I want, feed myself so that I'm feeling, calm and full. And then I'll go and talk to my close friends. So that would be dealing with the situation with curiosity, okay, and problem solving instead of with judgment. So here's a really practical tool to start implementing mindful eating or intuitive eating into your everyday life. And it's now a great time over Hanukkah, 8 days, to do an 8-day challenge where you can fill out an eating journal. Okay, now the eating journal isn't about exactly the food that you choose. It's not about limiting your food or limiting your calories or counting your macros. No, it's about connecting your feelings, your thoughts, okay, and also your physical sensations when you're eating. It's about getting in tune with your hunger and fullness, okay, and how different foods make you feel. So what you can do is you can log what you eat and when you eat it, where you're eating it, and what happens while you're eating. So before your meal, you can write down how hungry you're feeling. After your meal, you can write down how full you're feeling. And then you can follow that and track that and see if you're getting to the extremes or if you're staying, within the numbers in the middle. If you have many hours that you're very, very hungry, you can see how you feel afterwards. If you feel that you're like so full after, or maybe you're not filling yourself enough. So here's a great way to start implementing intuitive eating into your everyday. Okay, so to summarize, tools for intuitive eating is number one, start listening, start being aware, letting whatever come up, okay? And then number two is once you start listening, you have to trust it, okay? So for example, here's a really common question that comes up. I'm sure many of you have felt it before. You ate your breakfast and half an hour later, an hour later, you're hungry again, right? So you listened, hunger came up, you know that you're hungry, that's you listening, but are you going to trust it? So not trusting it would say, oh, no, I just ate half an hour ago or an hour ago, so it doesn't make sense that I'm hungry, so I'm going to wait. Then you wait and you wait and you wait, and your hunger just gets stronger and stronger. So no, so trust it. And with the trust, you can also allow for curiosity. So I ate an hour ago, I'm hungry now, I'll trust it, I'll eat. Let me try to think why I'm hungry. Maybe it's because I went for a run yesterday. Maybe it's because I'm ovulating. Maybe it's because I'm menstruating. Maybe it's because I'm nursing. Maybe it's because, I don't know, maybe my body can't always be predicted and I don't always know why, but I can trust it. Okay, so now this brings us to our last point, is how to raise an intuitive eater. Okay, so I think this can apply to any parent that wants to have a positive eating experience in their home and hand that over to their children, to give their to be able to raise children that are confident in their bodies and in their eating. It can be great for educators, okay, that are working with kids and youth. It could be great for any type of healthcare professional or any type of therapist that's working with youth. These tools are really, really great. Okay, so we know that diet culture now is, it's always sort of changing its face. And with the next generation, with our kids' generation, diet culture is very prominent over social media. So this is, for example, a picture from TikTok. Okay, so what happens when our kids are following TikTok? Very similar to what we've been experiencing from diet culture, is that somebody else is telling them what to eat, when to eat, how much to eat, and how to look, how they're supposed to look, right? And again, that causes us to then have a lack of trust in ourselves. And we instead trust the, diet guru that we're following on TikTok, and we eat their, according to their diet plan and according to their recipes, and we want our body to look like them. Okay, instead of trusting ourselves and our food and our foods that we want to eat. Okay, so here's an example of somebody who's promoting intermittent fasting. Okay, which is exactly the example, okay, of somebody else giving you guidelines about when to eat. Okay. So how can we as parents, as role models, as educators, okay, then give our children that trust in their bodies with all of the, mixed messages that they get from the media, okay, to not trust their bodies and to trust other people. Okay, what we want to do is empower them and strengthen their connection with their bodies and their trust in their bodies and in their hunger and fullness signals. So if we tell our kids what to eat and when to eat and how much to eat, then we really are no different than the diet and what they're seeing on TikTok. Okay, then again, our child is not eating for themselves and according to their own signals, they're eating for us. And I get children that come into my clinic and say, I'm eating to please my mom. I eat lunch because my mom tells me to, or I eat what my mom tells me to. And so then that later on makes them more vulnerable to diets or eating disorders because they don't trust in their own body. They're used to listening to other people, okay? Getting advice from other people about what to eat and how much to. Okay, so, but if we don't tell our kids what to eat, Then again is the question, well, are they just going to eat chocolates all day? So we have to find, again, a balance. Okay, so here is a division of responsibility, okay, between children and parents. Okay, so where's the parent's responsibility and where is the child's responsibility in eating? Okay, eating and feeding and sitting at the table. And this is according to Ellen Sater's division of responsibility. So it goes like this. Parents are in charge of choosing what the child eats. Okay, so the parent would then make the meal and also buys the food that's in the house. Okay, so the parent would prepare the meal. The parent also chooses when the child eats. So the parent would set up that there are, 3 main meals a day at this and this hour. The parent will then call the child to the table for the meal and serve the food that the parent has made. And where? So the parent is in charge of the overall setting of the meal. Okay, so all of the prep, all of the sort of boundaries of the meal, the parent sets up. So where does the child come in? The child chooses how much to eat and whether to eat. So that means that the child can eat until they're full, and when they're full, they stop. And they can also choose which foods they eat. Okay, so it could be that they want to only eat the rice or only eat the salad or only eat the chicken, and they can choose at any given moment what food they eat without the parent saying you have to eat from this and this and this, and you have to finish your plate and you have to finish your salad. And according to intuitive eating in the intuitive eating book, it's even suggested that at the same time, the parent can place the dessert and the salad and the chicken and the rice on the table at the same time so that all foods are considered neutral, giving the child authority to choose what he wants to eat. And if the child wants to eat dessert before he eats his salad or eats his chicken, that's allowed. This might sound extreme, but that's what's suggested in the intuitive eating book. And that is, again, so that all foods will be neutral. Okay, so that there's no food that's charged. And so we won't, if we always tell our children, you can't have this, you can't have that, then they're going to want it even more. And so if we put all the foods on the table and all foods are allowed, then the idea is that the child won't want one food over the other. So that is the division of responsibility. Okay. And then the last tool that I'd like to share is about our choice of language. Okay, as a parent, as an educator, as a role model, how can I speak about food in a positive way and in an empowering way, okay, and not in a way that promotes diet culture? Okay, so let's think about it. What are ways that we can describe a salad? So we can say, oh, a salad is slimming, I won't gain weight from it. And so that would be a diet culture description. Okay, what defines a diet culture description? It means how the diet culture would describe a food as how it will affect the physical shape of my body or my outer appearance, how the food will affect my physical appearance. Okay, but let's look at an alternative of how we can describe a salad. So we can say a salad is nourishing, it's filled with vitamins and minerals, it's satisfying, it's filling, it's fresh, okay? And so in that way, we're describing what it gives to my body, how it nourishes my body, but not how it affects my outer appearance of my body. And that's the difference, okay? If I look at food as nourishing, or I look at food as how it shapes my body. Okay. For example, Hanukkah, latkes. There are so many ways that I can describe latkes. How can I describe it in a way, again, that empowers my child, okay, and not imposes on them diet culture? So I can describe latkes as being fattening, and then that will impose fear on the food. It will become a fear food. And again, it's describing the food as how it will affect my outer appearance. Let's look at another way that we can describe a latke. First of all, it's a holiday treat. Okay, so we can describe food as something that connects us as a nation, connects us as a family, connects us to our history, right? It connects us to olive oil, which is the fruit of the land, which is the fruit in this right now of the season in Israel. And And instead of saying fattening, we can say that maybe this food isn't filling, or it's not nourishing, it's not enough. Okay, so there's no fear. If I eat the food, there's no fear. There's no negative effect. It's not going to increase my weight or change the way that I look, but it's not enough. So the way that I would describe it to a child is that if you choose to eat the ladka, then it might not fill you enough, and it might not be nourishing enough, and it might not give you, all of your protein and vitamins and minerals that you need in a filling meal. And so then it would be served on the table with also a salad and maybe, some protein in order for it to be nourishing. Okay, but here I don't need to give it a negative connotation. I can describe it as something that's lacking, that it's not full, it's not complete. So here's a summary of how we can describe food to our children, and ways that diet culture describes food, and ways that I would suggest that we don't talk about food. Okay, so diet culture describes food, again, as how it affects my appearance. It's slimming, it's low in calories, low in fat, low in carb, it's light diet, or you could say that food is less fattening. And so now let's look at how we can describe food as being nourishing. It's filling, it's satisfying, it's rich in vitamins and minerals, it gives us energy, it gives us fuel, it builds our body, it connects us with family and friends, it's soothing, it's relaxing, it gives us pleasure and joy, it's healing, treating, nourishing, it's a way of giving to our body. And those are the ways that we should be describing food. And those are the ways that we should, in my opinion, as role models, that, we should think about what is our connection with food. If we see food as something, that is fear imposing, that it's an enemy, that it's a battle, that it's something that I'm scared of, that will affect the way that I look and the way that people see me, right? And when I have that relationship with food, that's something that people around me see, right? Because that's the way I talk about food, and that's the way I make my food choices, and that's the way that our children will see us. But when I can share with my children my relationship with my food in a positive way, as a way that I nourish my body and give to my body, and protect my body and respect my body, and that's also what's handed over to my children. And the more that we can be role models for that positive relationship, and we can empower our children to have positive relationship with food and trust and connection with their bodies, the more they will be, the more they'll be able to tackle diet culture and all of the mixed messages that they get from the media, because of the empowerment that they get from home. So to summarize what we learned today, we went over tools from intuitive eating. We spoke about the effects of dieting and diet culture on the biology and psychology of our body. And last but not least, we learned tools of how we can empower the next generation to be intuitive eaters with positive body image, and with trust and connection with their bodies. So I hope that I was able to give you some tools to shine some light on your hunger and fullness signals. And I hope that this Hanukkah, you're able to reconnect with your bodies, be curious, listen, trust. And I invite you to start writing an intuitive eating journal, according to the intuitive eating journal that's here. Okay, so to write out the time, what to eat. You can rank from 1 to 10 how hungry you felt, and you can add in what you were doing, thinking, and feeling. And I think this is a great way to start practicing intuitive eating this Hanukkah. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed. And again, I'm Nava, a clinical nutritionist. Yeah, good luck.